Hi, I'm Phillips. In this video, I'm going to show you how to completely restore this beautiful reclaimed cast iron window frame. I'm going to start by cleaning up all the old rust off both sides. The next stage, we're going to sand it down to make it as smooth as possible. Then I'm going to apply a sealant. Once that's dried, then I can paint it. After a couple of coats of paint, it's then ready to be glazed. Now, of course, you could use glass for this, but I'm going to be cutting out some Perspex. Once the glazing is complete, the edges can be shaped up, left to dry, and then repainted. Once it's cleaned up, painted, and brought back to life, if you're still looking for the oldie world type of look, you can always add a browning wax to the top of the paint. Now, I'm not quite sure how old this window is, but what I do know is there's a lot of rust all the way around here, and this needs to be removed off before I can apply any sealant or paint on there. So I'm going to put my mask on and my safety specs, and I'm going to start by using a 4-inch grinder with a sanding pad on. I take this all the way around the outside edge where it's flat. Always use your PPE when using these type of tools on this material. I'm using a mask, safety specs and gloves. It's very important that you get rid of every single bit of rust from the entire item. Once I'd finished with the grinder, I then used a polisher with a crimp bevel brush. This helped me get in between all the beaded areas of the window frame. That is one side now complete. It's looking fantastic, but don't forget, you have to do the other side as well. On this side, I only had to use the polisher with the crimp bevel brush. So that is now one almost brand new looking cast iron window, ready to be sealed. So my next stage is, I'm going to use the Frenchic's finishing coat for the first application directly onto the cast iron, which is going to seal it. Apply this on with a brush. There we go. It looks like a white milky substance when you're applying it and it's wet, but once it's dry, it's completely transparent. Once I've completed one side, I placed 2 battens on my workbench, turned it over, and then painted the other. It only takes a couple of minutes to apply, and it dries within a couple of hours. Then it was ready for a second coat. Now the Frenchic finishing coat is dry, I can paint it. I'm going to use my paint sprayer, so I'm going to hang this on a piece of line. That'll allow me to spray both sides. I'm using Wagner small handheld paint sprayer, and I'm applying Frenchic's alfresco paint. Once I've applied one coat, I'll leave this to dry for a couple of hours and then apply a second. Then it's ready to start glazing. So now the paintwork is dry. It's had 2 coats of paint and the sealant on it beforehand. The next stage is to get it glazed. Now I'm not using glass, I'm going to use Perspex, and I am going to cut this myself. But first of all, I'm going to take a piece of paper and I'm going to have to create a template of the size of this opening to infill that with the Perspex. And I'm going to scribe around the edge of that frame as tight as I can. Now this isn't the size I need to cut out. I need to step it in just a little fraction in here, just about 5mm, so it catches onto that lip on there. So I'll take my pencil, start to draw just around here. Once that's done, I'll take my scissors and I'll cut round that outside edge. That should now fit in here. Now I've got 3 different shapes here of different size openings for the glass to go in. So I've cut my template out of paper. Once you're happy with them in there, check that they fit the other ones. And if you are happy that they do fit in the rest of them, which quite often this type of style window you do, they're generally all the same. All I need to do now is transfer these onto the Perspex and then cut them out with my jigsaw. It's quite easy to do regardless of how thick the Perspex is you're using. I'm using a 4mm Perspex. Once this was cut down to size, if you've got any rough edges on there or it's a little bit tight, you can take the edges off using a hand file. Once it's cut, place it into position. If you're happy with that, continue cutting the rest of your pieces until you've got enough. Then you're going to need to putty these into position. So I'm going to start by popping this into my silicone gun and then trimming the end. Now I'm going to place the end of the nozzle just in the edge of the window frame there and start to put a very thin bed of that right the way around. Once that's in, you can take your piece of Perspex, place that down, nice and gentle, pressing it all the way across, putting an equal amount of pressure, and you'll start to see the putty starting to ooze out a little bit on the other side. We can turn this over and trim that off in a short while, but the main thing is to just get it in position like this. Once you're happy with that, you do the same on the next couple. If this was one large window, of course, you would then apply the putty on the back side, shape all that up, and then lift it up and cut it away the other side. Or if it was in position in a window, of course, you just go both sides to do it. But I'm going to bed my pieces of Perspex in first before I shape up the back. Comes out of the reservoir really, really easy, nice and smooth. A lot easier than the old-fashioned traditional way of puttying. So now each piece of glazing is bedded into position. I'm going to apply more putty around the outside face of it there and start to shaping it up. And then once that's in, it'll help hold the piece of glass into position or Perspex. Then I can turn it over and trim off the other side. Remember, if you were doing this and it was in position, you could just simply walk both sides and do it. But I'm going to keep turning it back and forth. Once that's applied, I'm just going to make sure the end of my scraper is clean. And start to shape that at that position. And do that by just pressing the end, pushing it in around like that. Very like you would normally with traditional putty. So now all the glazing putty is applied that side. I've started to smooth the edges off. It's not completely finished yet. I've got to trim a little bit of it up once it starts to go off, but I'm now going to turn my attention to the opposite side and start to trim off these little bits around here, because that's now oozed out all the way around the edges, and all I want to do is trim that nice and tight and make sure that there is no cavities in there. Once you've scraped off the excessive putty from each panel, you can then just get yourself a damp cloth very gently, because of course you don't want to push that out, it's not dry on the other side, and you can just wipe them up, and you can see it's really gripped and filled those gaps in there. And remember, this is paintable, so we will be touching the paintwork up once it's completely cured and be painting over the putty at the same time. Get a light piece of sandpaper, just like a 150, 200 grade, and give it a gentle tickle over in preparation for painting. One final wipe to remove all the dust with your silicone wipe. Now there are two ways, of course, you can paint over your putty now it's dry. You could cut it in by hand using a small paintbrush if you've got a real good steady hand, or you could even just mask up the edges to help you cut it in that little bit neater. But for me, I'm going to be spray painting mine. It's a little bit quicker, so I'm going to mask over the whole area of the glazing to protect it before I use my paint sprayer. Now the masking is complete. All I need to do now is repaint it using my paint spray. After I'd sealed my frame, I originally spray painted it with Frencic's Alfresco chalk paint. I give it a couple of coats first. Now the putty's dry, I'm going to give it 2 further coats of the same Alfresco paint. So that's my restoration work complete on this cast iron window. Now don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want more inspiration, check out our other videos.